There are places in this world where time moves differently. Not in any way that science can explain, but in a way that makes your stomach turn and your skin crawl when you finally notice. This is the story of Maya Chin, a 28-year-old paralegal from Milwaukee who inherited her grandmother's apartment in Chicago and discovered that some doors should never be knocked upon, some invitations should never be accepted, and some neighbors are not what they appear to be. What she uncovered in that old brick building on the city's north side would challenge everything she believed about life, death, and the hungry things that exist in the spaces between. Maya had always been close to her grandmother Eleanor. The old woman had practically raised her after Maya's parents divorced when she was 7, shuttling her between their new families like unwanted luggage. Eleanor's apartment had been a sanctuary, a place that smelled of lavender and old books, where the radiators hissed comfort during brutal Chicago winters and the windows overlooked a courtyard where pigeons gathered like gray-feathered gossips. When Eleanor passed away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 91, Maya inherited everything, including the lease to apartment 2B in the Ashford building, a rent-controlled gem that real estate agents would have killed to get their hands on. The building's superintendent, a weathered man in his 60s named Harold Vance, handed Maya the keys on a gray Tuesday afternoon in October. His handshake was firm but brief, and his eyes carried a weight that Maya initially attributed to the melancholy of losing a longtime resident. Eleanor had lived in the Ashford for over 4 decades after all. But as Harold led her through the lobby with its faded Art Deco tiles and brass mailboxes green with age, Maya noticed something peculiar in his demeanor. He walked quickly, almost urgently, and he kept his gaze fixed straight ahead, never once glancing at the doors they passed. The apartment was smaller than Maya remembered from her childhood visits, but it retained that familiar warmth, that sense of being wrapped in history. Eleanor's belongings remained largely untouched. Towers of books lined the walls. Porcelain figurines of shepherdesses and angels crowded the shelves. And in the bedroom closet, Maya discovered a collection of photo albums spanning decades, their leather covers cracked and faded like old skin. She spent her first evening in the apartment flipping through these visual time capsules, watching her grandmother age in reverse as she moved backward through the years. There were photos of neighborhood block parties, building Christmas gatherings, and most intriguingly, a series of images documenting the annual Halloween party held in the Ashford's community room. The first Halloween photo was dated 1987. Eleanor stood near a punch bowl, dressed as a witch, her smile genuine and unguarded. Behind her, other residents mingled in various costumes. And there, in the corner of the frame, stood a family of 3. A man in his late 30s wearing a pressed suit despite the festive occasion, a woman of similar age in a conservative dress with a pearl necklace, and between them, a girl who appeared to be about 8 years old, her blonde hair pulled back with a red ribbon. They were not in costume. They simply stood there, staring directly at the camera with expressions that hovered somewhere between smiles and something else entirely. Maya continued through the albums, examining each subsequent Halloween photo with growing unease. The years changed. The decorations evolved. Eleanor aged gracefully, her hair silvering, her posture gradually curving. Other residents came and went, their faces appearing and disappearing across the timeline like actors in a play with an ever-rotating cast. But the family in the corner remained constant. The same man. The same woman. The same little girl. Their clothes never changed. Their positions never shifted. Their expressions remained frozen in that unsettling almost smile. In the 1995 photo, they appeared exactly as they had in 1987. In 2003, not a single gray hair had appeared on the man's head, not a single wrinkle had formed around the woman's eyes, and the little girl still wore that red ribbon in her unchanged blonde hair. Maya told herself it was a mistake. Perhaps these were different people who simply resembled the original family. Perhaps it was some elaborate running joke among building residents, a tradition of sorts. But when she examined the photos more closely, using her phone's camera to zoom in on the details, she noticed things that made her blood run cold. A small mole on the man's left cheek, present in every single image. A thin scar on the woman's wrist, visible each time her sleeve rode up slightly. And the girl's eyes, those pale blue eyes that never blinked, never looked away from the camera and never ever aged. The most recent photo was dated Halloween 2023, just 1 year ago. Eleanor stood alone in the frame, no longer in costume, her 90-year-old face bearing an expression Maya had never seen on her grandmother before. It was fear. Pure, undiluted terror masked behind a forced smile. And there, in their usual corner, the family stood watching. Unchanged. Unighet. Unnatural. Maya did not sleep that first night. She lay in Eleanor's old bed, listening to the building settle around her, its old bones creaking and groaning in the darkness. And sometime around 3 in the morning she heard footsteps in the hallway outside her door. They were measured and deliberate, too synchronized to belong to a single person. It sounded like 3 sets of feet moving in perfect unison, stopping directly outside apartment 2B. Maya held her breath, watching the thin strip of light beneath her door, and she saw shadows there. 3 shadows standing motionless, waiting. The shadows remained for exactly 7 minutes before the footsteps resumed, moving away toward the stairwell. Maya did not investigate. Some primal instinct, older than language and deeper than thought, told her that opening that door would be a mistake she would not survive to regret. The next morning, Maya sought out Harold Vance in his basement office. The superintendent's workspace was cluttered with tools and maintenance logs, and the single window near the ceiling let in a pale gray light that seemed to drain the color from everything it touched. Harold listened to Maya's questions about the family in the photos, and his face went through a series of transformations, from confusion to recognition to something that looked very much like grief. He told her they lived in apartment 4C. Had lived there since before he started working at the Ashford in 1982. The Wentworth family, that was their name on the mailbox, though Harold had never heard anyone use it. They kept to themselves. They never requested repairs. They never complained about noise or heating or any of the countless issues that filled Harold's days. In over 40 years he had never once set foot inside their apartment. When Maya asked him about the photographs, about the impossible fact that they had not aged in nearly 4 decades, Harold's eyes went distant. He told her there were things in this world that defied explanation, things that existed in the margins of ordinary life, feeding on something he could not name. He had seen other residents approach the Wentworths over the years, drawn by curiosity or loneliness or some inexplicable compulsion. Those residents always disappeared eventually. Sometimes they moved away in the middle of the night. Sometimes they simply stopped existing, their apartments suddenly vacant, their names forgotten by everyone except Harold, who kept a list in a locked drawer of his desk. 17 names in 42 years. He told Maya not to knock on their door. Not to make eye contact in the hallway. And most importantly, never to accept their invitation to dinner. Maya spent the following week researching. She dug through city records and old newspaper archives, searching for any mention of the Wentworth family or the Ashford building. What she found contradicted everything Harold had told her. According to official documents, apartment 4C had been vacant since 1952 when a family of 3 had died in a fire that consumed only their unit while leaving the rest of the building untouched. The family's name was not Wentworth. It was something older, something that the newspaper had misprinted or deliberately obscured, leaving only a blur of consonants that hurt Maya's eyes to look at. But there were photographs accompanying the news article. A man in his late 30s. A woman of similar age. And a little girl with blonde hair and pale blue eyes that stared out from the newsprint with an intensity that transcended decades. They had been dead for over 70 years. And yet Maya had seen them in photographs taken every year since 1987, unchanging and eternal and watching. On the 7th night of her stay in the Ashford building, Maya found the note. It had been slipped beneath her door sometime between midnight and dawn, a small rectangle of cream-colored paper with handwriting so precise it looked almost mechanical. The message was brief but filled her with a dread that settled into her bones like winter frost. "We're so glad you're staying in Eleanor's old apartment. She always declined our invitations. We hope you'll be different. Dinner is at 7. We insist." Maya knew she should leave. Every rational impulse screamed at her to pack her bags and flee this building, this city, this nightmare that wore the mask of ordinary life. But something held her there. Perhaps it was the need to understand what had frightened her grandmother for so many years. Perhaps it was the reporter's instinct she had inherited from Eleanor, who had worked as a journalist before retiring. Or perhaps it was something else, some subtle influence that had been working on her since she first set foot in the Ashford, drawing her toward apartment 4C like a moth toward a flame that burned with cold, hungry light. At 6:45 that evening, Maya found herself standing in the 4th-floor hallway. The corridor stretched before her, lit by flickering bulbs that cast dancing shadows on the walls. The doors to the other apartments were closed and silent, their occupants either absent or unwilling to witness what was about to unfold. And there, at the end of the hall, stood apartment 4C, its door slightly ajar, warm golden light spilling through the gap like honey mixed with blood. Maya approached slowly. Each step felt like walking through water, resistance building around her as though the very air wanted to hold her back. But still she moved forward, drawn by a compulsion she could no longer name, until she stood before that open door and the light washed over her face. The apartment inside looked normal. Impossibly, terrifyingly normal. A living room furnished in mid-century style, everything perfectly preserved as though time had simply stopped in 1952. A dining table set for four, with china plates and crystal glasses and silver utensils arranged with mathematical precision. And there, standing in a row before the table, the family waited. They looked exactly as they had in the photographs. The man with his mole. The woman with her scar. The little girl with her red ribbon and those pale, pale eyes. They smiled at Maya, and their smiles were wrong, stretching too wide and showing too many teeth and not reaching anywhere close to their eyes. "We're so pleased you accepted our invitation," the man said, and his voice was like static on a dead radio channel, words formed from white noise and empty frequencies. "Eleanor never did. 43 years and she never once accepted. We're so very hungry, you see. And you smell so much like her." Maya tried to run. Her muscles screamed with the effort, every fiber of her being straining toward escape. But her feet would not move. Her body had become a prison, trapping her consciousness in flesh that no longer obeyed her commands. The family began to move toward her, their movements synchronized and unnatural, covering the distance without appearing to take steps. The little girl reached her first. Those pale blue eyes looked up at Maya, and in their depths she saw something that the human mind was never meant to comprehend. Centuries of hunger. Millennia of waiting. An existence that stretched back to before language, before civilization, before humanity had crawled out of the darkness and built their first trembling fires against the night. "We don't eat flesh," the girl said, and her voice was the creak of settling foundations and the whisper of dust in abandoned rooms. "We eat something sweeter. Something warmer. Something you don't even know you have until it's gone." And in that moment Maya understood. She understood why the residents on Harold's list had been forgotten. Why their apartments had been found vacant. Why no one could remember their names or faces. The family didn't consume bodies. They consumed something far more precious. They consumed existence itself. The memory of being. The echo that a life leaves in the minds of others. Once they fed, their victims had never been. No birth. No life. No death. Just an empty space where a person should have been. Maya felt them beginning. Felt the edges of herself starting to fade, her memories loosening like old photographs sliding out of an album. Her childhood birthdays grew dim. Her grandmother's face became indistinct. Her own name began to feel foreign, like a word she had heard once in a dream and could no longer quite recall. But then she remembered something Eleanor had written in the margin of one photograph, a note Maya had dismissed as the wandering thought of an aging mind. "They fear what they consume. Show them their own emptiness." With the last of her fading strength, Maya reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone. She activated the camera. She pointed it at the family. And she let them see themselves. The screen showed nothing. Where three figures should have stood, there was only empty space. The family had no reflection because they had no existence to reflect. They were holes in reality, absences pretending to be presences, hunger given form but not substance. The scream that erupted from the little girl's mouth was not a human sound. It was the shriek of something ancient confronting its own fundamental emptiness, the howl of a void forced to acknowledge that it was void. The family began to fold inward, their forms collapsing like paper burning from the center outward, their features distorting and stretching as whatever force had held them together for so many decades finally released its grip. Maya ran. She ran through the hallway and down the stairs and out into the Chicago night, where the wind carried the smell of autumn leaves and distant car exhaust and all the mundane miracles of ordinary existence. Behind her, the fourth floor of the Ashford building went dark, and apartment 4C became silent for the first time in over 70 years. Maya never returned to the building. She surrendered the lease and moved to a new city where the buildings were modern and the neighbors aged normally and nothing lurked in the spaces between moments. But sometimes late at night she still wakes with the memory of those pale blue eyes staring up at her, and she wonders if she truly escaped or if some part of her remains trapped in that dining room, forever seated at a table set for four, waiting for a meal that never ends. And if you ever find yourself in an old building with neighbors who never seem to change, who smile too widely and move too precisely and watch you with eyes that hold centuries of patience, remember Maya's story. Remember that some doors should never be opened. Some invitations should never be accepted. And some hungers can never, ever be satisfied. If this story sent chills down your spine and left you questioning the neighbors you thought you knew, consider joining our community by clicking the subscribe button and turning on notifications so you never miss when the darkness speaks again. Drop your thoughts in the comments below, share this tale with someone brave enough to hear it, And give this video a like if you want more stories from the spaces between what we know and what we fear to imagine. Until next time, sleep well and remember to check who is standing outside your door before you open it.